37, which we're sung in Paris from page 7 through to page 37.
The Buddha's Dharma and Sangha, until enlightened I seek refuge, through merit from giving and the rest. Through it all may I become Buddha. In the Buddha's Dharma and Sangha, until enlightened I seek refuge, through merit from giving and the rest. To aid all may I become Buddha. In the Buddha's Dharma and Sangha, until enlightened I seek refuge, through merit from giving and the rest. To aid all may I become Buddha. May all sentient beings have happiness and its causes. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and its causes. May all sentient beings never be parted from sorrowless bliss. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from bias, attachment, and hatred. To the founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer of the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. To the founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer of the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. To the founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer of the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. When, O supreme among humans, you were born on this earth, you paced out 7 strides, then said, I am supreme in this world. To you who were wise, then I prostrate. With pure bodies formed supremely pure, wisdom ocean like a golden mountain, fame that blazes in the 3 worlds, winner of the best, Lord, to you I prostrate. With the supreme signs, face like spotless moon, color like gold, to you I prostrate. Dust free like you, the 3 worlds are not. Incomparably wise one, to you I prostrate. The Savior having great compassion, the Founder having all understanding, the field of merit with qualities like a vast ocean, to you, the one got the justness I prostrate. The purity that frees one from attachment, the virtue that frees one from the lower realms, the one path, the sublime pure reality, to the Dharma that pacifies I prostrate. Those who are liberated and who also show the path to liberation, the holy few qualified with realizations, who are devoted to the moral precepts, to you, the sublime community intending virtue, I prostrate. Homage to the Supreme Buddha, homage to the Dharma refuge, homage to the great Sangha, to all 3 ever devout homage. To all worthy of respect, bowing with bodies as many as all realms, atoms, in all aspects, with supreme faith I pay homage. Do not commit any non-virtuous actions, perform only perfect virtuous actions. Subdue your mind thoroughly. This is the teaching of the Buddha. A star, a mirage, the flame, a lamp, an illusion, a drop of dew, or a bubble, a dream, a flash of lightning, a cloud, see conditioned things as such. Through these merits may sentient beings attain the rank of all-seeing, subdue the foe of faults, and be delivered from samsara's ocean, perturbed by the waves of aging, sickness, and death. From Tushita's hundreds of God's protectors' heart, to tip of this fresh, pure white heap, curd-like cloud, O Sandrapa, Dharma's omniscient King, pray come to this place with your disciples. In space ahead, on line throne, lotus and moon, venerable Guru, smile brightly with delight. Pray stay hundreds of eons to spread doctrine as supreme merit field for my mind of faith. Your wisdom mind sees full range of knowables. Your eloquent speech adorns fortunate ears. Your beauteous body, fame, glory outstanding. Homage to you, worth what to think of, hear and see. Pleasant offerings of water, various flowers, fragrant incense, light perfume, and so on. Oceans of offerings set out and in vision, offered up to you, supreme field of merit, non-virtue committed with body, speech, and mind, which I have heaped up since beginningless time, especially what has contradicted three vows. Each I confess from my heart with strong regret. In time of strife you strove to learn and practice, shunned mundane concerns, made life essence full. O protector from depths of our hearts, we rejoice in your powerful great deeds. Venerable Gurus from love and wisdom, clouds densely massed in your Dharma Kaya sky, pray loose a rain of vast profound Dharma on fields of disciples just as needed. May whatever virtue that I here gathered bring benefit to all beings and doctrine, and may it make venerable O Sandrapa's essential teaching specially shine forever. Nigme sewe te chen chen rezi, dreame kem de wampo jam pelyam, drupo malu jom ze sang wedak, ganche te pe sugyen song kappa, lo sandrape jagla sovade. O glorious and precious root Guru, pray take seat of lotus on my crown, caring for me with your great kindness. Bestow attainments, body, speech, and mind. O glorious and precious root Guru, pray take seat of lotus at my heart, caring for me with your great attainments common and supreme. O glorious and precious root Guru, pray take seat of lotus at my heart, caring for me with your great kindness, until supreme awakening remain steadfast. Homage to the exalted three jewels. Thus have I heard at one time. The Blessed One was dwelling in Rajagriha mountain together with the great assembly of monks and the great assembly of bodhisattvas. At that time the Blessed One was absorbed in the concentration of the countless aspects of phenomena called profound illumination. At that very time, the superior Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva, the great being, was looking perfectly at practice of the profound perfection of wisdom, perfectly looking at the emptiness of inherent existence of the five aggregates also. Then, through the power of the Buddha, the Venerable Shariputra said to the superior Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva, the great being, how should a child of lineage trained who wishes to engage in the practice of the profound perfection of wisdom? Thus he spoke, and the superior Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva, the great being, replied to the Venerable Shariputra as follows. Shariputra, whichever son or daughter of the lineage wishes to engage in the practice of the profound perfection of wisdom should look perfectly like this. Subsequently, looking perfectly and correctly at the emptiness of inherent existence of the five aggregates also. Form is empty and emptiness is form. Emptiness is not other than form. Form is not other than emptiness. In the same way, feeling, discrimination, compositional factors, and consciousness are empty. Shariputra, like this, all phenomena are empty without characteristics. That is, they are not produced and do not cease. They have no defilement and no separation from defilement. They have no decrease and no increase. Therefore, Shariputra, in emptiness there is no form, no feeling, no discrimination, no compositional factors, no consciousness. There is no eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind. No visible form, no sound, no smell, no taste, no object of touch, no mental phenomenon. There is no I element and so forth up to no mind element, up to no element of mental consciousness. There is no ignorance and no cessation of ignorance and so forth up to no aging and death and no cessation of aging and death. Likewise, there is no suffering, no origin, no cessation, and no path, no exalted wisdom, no attainment, and also no non-attainment. Therefore, Shariputra, because there is no attainment, bodhisattvas rely on and abide in the perfection of wisdom. And because their minds have no obstructions, they have no fear. Passing utterly beyond error, they attain the final state beyond sorrow. All Buddhas who reside in the three times by relying on the perfection of wisdom become manifest and complete Buddhas in the state of unsurpassed, perfect, and complete enlightenment. Therefore, the mantra of the perfection of wisdom, the mantra of great knowledge, the unsurpassed mantra, the equal to the unequal mantra, the mantra that thoroughly pacifies all suffering, since it is not false, should be known as the truth. The mantra of the perfection of wisdom is proclaimed. Tayata gate gate paragate parasamgate bodhisoha. Shariputra, this is how a bodhisattva, a great being, should train in the profound perfection of wisdom. Then the Blessed One arose from that consecration and said to the superior Avalokiteshvara, the bodhisattva, the great being, well said, O child of the lineage, so it is. The profound perfection of wisdom should be practiced exactly as you have taught, and the Tathagatas will rejoice. When the Blessed One had said this, the Venerable Shariputra, the superior Avalokiteshvara, the bodhisattva, the great being, and the entire assembly, as well as worldly beings, gods, demigods, and Gandharvas, and others, were filled with admiration and highly praised what had been spoken by the Blessed One. In the holy supreme abode of the Dakinis, possessed of clairvoyance and miraculous power, unwaveringly caring for practitioners as your children, homage to the host of the three places Dakinis. Akasamara Sachadora Samariyafi. Hayata Om Gate Paratam Gate Bodhisoha. Through the power of truth of the exalted three jewel speech, may all on the side of negativity, such as the four Maras, be stopped. May they become non-existent. May they be pacified. All enemies, obstructors, and hindrances, Shanti Kuruye Soha. the 80,000 types of obstructors pacified, freed from adverse harmful conditions. May all be conducive and perfect auspiciousness, bring happiness and well-being here right now. Ground perfume anointed flowers strewn Meru floorlands, sun and moon adorned, seen as Buddha, healed and offered, thus may all sentient beings enjoy pure lands. Geshe Tsulga, Sangye Chodan Sogi Chonam La Jantu Padu Dagni Pyatsuchi Dagi Chönyen Yipe Sonam Ki Drola Penchir Sangye Drupa Shok Sangye Chodan Sogi Chonam La Jantu Padu Dagni Pyatsuchi Dagi Chönyen Yipe Sonam Ki Drola Penchir Sangye Drupa Shok Sangye Chodan Sogi Chonam La Jantu Padu Dagni Kyapsuchi Dagi Chönyen Yipe Sonam Ki Drola Penchir Sangye Drupa Shok.
Okay, let's just start with a few minutes quiet meditation. It's mainly quiet on the inside. So it starts with sitting in a good meditation posture. So if you're on a cushion, generally that means sitting with a small cushion under your backside, which helps keep your back straight, which is probably the most important part. So if you're sitting on a chair, don't lean back, just try and keep your back straight and keep your feet flat on the floor. They reach. So if you're on a cushion, your legs are crossed in full lotus or half lotus or whatever cross-leg position works for you. And your shoulders are level with each other, parallel with the floor. Your arms by your sides relaxed, slightly rounded, with your hands in your lap, palm upwards, with the right on top of the left, with the tips of your thumbs touching. And your neck is slightly bent forward. Then your eyes are lightly closed or just very slightly open. So if they're open, it's not that you're looking at anything, it's just that if they're a little bit open, some light comes in and it can keep your meditation a little more awake. Your mouth's closed, but your lower jaw is relaxed. You don't need to clench your teeth. It's not that hard. And the tip of your tongue rests against the front of your hard palate, just behind your top teeth. So I think that's about it with the posture. So then you try and bring your mind inside, away from objects of the 5 physical senses: sound, smells, taste, touch, sights. So as well as keeping our mind away from objects of the physical senses, we need to keep it away from distraction to meditation, mainly discursive, sort of chattering, scattered thoughts. And also we need to be aware of kind of sluggishness or sleepiness, that drowsiness that can also darken our mind. So with that, find your breath where it goes out and comes in through your nostrils. So that's where you're going to focus your concentration, focus your mind on your breath as it goes out and comes in. Just keep your full awareness on that point. So generate a strong determination. Think, now I'm going to focus on my breath, without allowing myself to become distracted by anything whatsoever. So see how long you can keep it there. And then the moment you notice that it's drifted away for one reason or another, just drop whatever it was that distracted you and just come straight back to your breath. So you might need to keep doing that, but that's the meditation. So let's do that for a few minutes. Okay, now that your mind is calmer and clearer than before, again, just generate a motivation for being here this morning. So this is, the essential meaning of all these prayers we did before. Think, the purpose of my life is to lead all sentient beings from suffering to happiness. Not just ordinary happiness, but to the supreme happiness of enlightenment. In order to do that, I first have to reach enlightenment myself. And the only way to do that is to follow and accomplish the path that leads to enlightenment. So following and accomplishing the path that leads to enlightenment is called practicing Dharma. Practicing the teaching of the Buddha. Therefore, I'm going to participate in this class on how to practice Dharma. For the sole purpose of reaching enlightenment for the sake of all sentient beings. So, we should all have that motivation for being here this morning, and that should also be our motivation for our entire life. All our lives from now until we reach enlightenment. Okay. I'll drink to that. Everybody reaches for their drinks. Cheers. So, where should we go? Some people haven't been here before. Hands up. Who hasn't been here? Gee. Got nothing better to do on a Sunday morning? Show me again. 1, 2. Never been here before. Studied Buddhism before. Who hasn't studied Buddhism before? Who doesn't know that much about it? Okay. Well, anyway, welcome. So there's some people from Bunker Hill. So why did you come here this morning?
For class presentation.
Pardon?
Class presentation.
No, it's like anthropological research.
Yes.
Okay. So how many of you?
Get her hand raised, like
Yeah.
that.
Okay. Yeah. So So for a little background, what we do here is study and practice Tibetan Buddhism. Tibetan Buddhism is really Indian Buddhism as it was practiced in Tibet. And His Holiness the Dalai Lama says that Dalai Lama is the leader of Tibetan Buddhism in the world. He says that the important thing about Buddhism that is studied and practiced in Tibet is that there should be a lineage that could be traced back to Indian Buddhism, to the great Indian teachers, and eventually back to the Buddha himself, who, as you know, lived 500 years BC. What do we call it now? Some of the early Western scholars who looked at Tibetan Buddhism called it Lamaism, as if it was some kind of weird practice that was invented by the Tibetan Lamas. So Lama is like Dalai Lama, Lama this, Lama that. Lama is a Tibetan word that actually means, it's a translation of the Indian word guru, which just means teacher, spiritual teacher. You Indian? Bangladesh? Close. Yeah. There are a lot of Buddhists in Bangladesh. You one of those, or? So how is the practice of Buddhism in Bangladesh? Is it,
I mean, I've seen a lot of Buddhists, but I don't know about the practices.
So there are temples and monks?
Yeah, there are temples, lots of them.
So, I think generally we know the story of the Buddha. He was born a prince, and he was brought up to take over the kingdom from his father. He chose instead to search for the meaning of life, the reason that people suffered, that people got sick, that people died, and that as he saw around, there were a lot of what were called sadhus, the sort of wandering mendicant practitioners, Vedic practitioners, or Hindu. I don't know if it was called Hinduism back then, but what we call Hinduism today, they were practicing, and they wandered around, dressed very simply, and begged for their food, and they were the most happy, peaceful people he'd seen. So he wondered how to resolve this kind of dichotomy. So he went off in search of the truth. He studied with a lot of teachers, and when he felt that he'd learned everything they had to teach and he still hadn't realised the truth, then he went and meditated for some time in a place called Bodh Gaya in eastern part of India, in a state called Bihar, and eventually he reached understanding of how things exist, which was called enlightenment, and that's what we're trying to reach ourselves. Well, that's what we're being taught how to reach, as I mentioned before, by following the path to enlightenment, the same path that the Buddha followed, because when the Buddha attained enlightenment, he realized that it was an exceptional achievement, but he also realized that everybody had the potential. All beings had the potential, not just humans, but animals and insects. All had a mind that at its very core had what was called a clear light nature that could be developed or could be uncovered. And that all beings had the potential to become enlightened. not necessarily in their current lifetime. I mean, animals and insects can't really follow the path to enlightenment, and most humans can't either, for whatever reason. But all beings had the potential. In other words, all beings were, in a sense, future enlightened beings or future Buddhas. Buddha is a Sanskrit word for one who is fully awake. Awake from what? Awake from the deep sleep of ignorance. So that was the difference between the Buddha, the enlightened being, and all other, what we call sentient beings. So a sentient being is a being who has a mind that is not enlightened. So there are two kinds of beings. There are enlightened beings and there are sentient beings. All sentient beings have the potential to become enlightened beings if they do what it takes to become enlightened. So then, just to mention the Buddhist worldview, then among sentient beings, those who are not Buddhas, those who are not enlightened, there are two kinds. There are those who are free or liberated from cyclic existence, and there are those who are still caught within cyclic existence. So those who are free from cyclic existence still have traces of ignorance, the imprints of ignorance in their mind. That's why they're still sentient beings and not Buddhas. But they've eliminated the gross ignorance, the sort of heaviest ignorance, which is what keeps the sentient beings in cyclic existence. So within cyclic existence, the Buddha described 6 realms or 6 states, 6 kinds of existence. There were 3 upper realms and 3 lower realms. So the 3 lower realms were characterized by the deepest ignorance and the greatest suffering. And the upper realms, 3 upper realms, were characterized by relative happiness, but the beings there are still under the control of the gross ignorance. So the 3 lower realms are called the hell realm, which is the realm of the greatest suffering, and the hungry ghost realm, which is also the beings there have great suffering, but less than the hell realms, and then the animal realm. So the only one of those 3 that we can see is the animal realm. Some people can see spirits, but I think they even have programs on TV where people go with instruments and like that, looking for paranormal activity. So there are plenty of spirits. So with the animal realm, we, dogs and cats and elephants and mosquitoes and snakes and fish and all these other beings that we see around us. That's the animal realm. So the suffering, the animal realm, I think it's fairly obvious. That's less than the suffering of the hungry ghosts, and that's less than the suffering of the hells. In the upper realm, we have the human realm, which we can see again. Then there are 2 sort of god realms. These are gods in terms of sort of celestial beings, not God in the sense of theistic religion, the creator God. These are small g gods who experience much greater pleasure and much longer lives and a different sort of environment from the one that we experience as humans, but they're still caught within cyclic existence. So all these beings, we have the thing out there. So you'll see out there, appropriately near the toilets, a pictorial representation of the wheel of life, as it's called, or cyclic existence. The Sanskrit word is samsara. That means the round of existence. So in the drawing, you see this kind of monster with big teeth and sharp claws holding the wheel like this, so that's he's called Yama, the Lord of Death. So there's no actual real Lord of Death who comes down like the Grim Reaper and kills us or anything. It's symbolic. It shows that all beings within cyclic existence are subject to impermanence and death. The impermanence meaning everything changes from moment to moment, like a waterfall. Nothing stays the same. Everything's constantly changing, and as sentient beings within cyclic existence, from the moment we're born, we start to die. We call it living, but actually it's dying, because there's only one place we're going to, and that's death. And then we die, and our body dies, and our mind continues into another body. And so it goes round, and sometimes we're in the upper realms, more often in the lower realms, and we live, we suffer, we die, we get reborn over and over again. This has been going on since beginningless time. So each sentient being has its own personal stream of consciousness that has existed since beginningless time and will continue forever. So how it continues is in our own hands at this point. So we can decide this is, a load of rubbish and just continue carrying on, and then continue suffering in cyclic existence endlessly till the end of time. Or we can see that there is actually a way out, that we can free our mind from ignorance, because ignorance, like the rest of cyclic existence, is not permanent. Ignorance can be removed by wisdom. There's an antidote to ignorance. And we can free ourselves from cyclic existence, and from there we can attain enlightenment. And from there we can work to bring all other sentient beings to that state of supreme wisdom and supreme happiness. So that's the project. The Dharma project. So ignorance is not seeing the way in which things exist. So there are two kinds of ignorance. Talking about gross ignorance, the ignorance that keeps us in suffering and keeps us in cyclic existence. There's the ignorance of conventional reality, the reality in which we function, the reality that is dictated by the law of karma, or cause and effect. So the essential meaning of karma, or cause and effect, is that certain actions that we do, and we're talking more here mental actions rather than physical actions, certain actions that we do bring a result of suffering, and certain actions we do bring the result of happiness. Now, all of us want to be happy and satisfied and kind of feel good. But most of us don't. Or the happinesses that we do experience are fleeting and not particularly satisfying. And then whatever brought them about, we have to kind of go over and do it all again, So it doesn't last. So it's not a very satisfactory kind of happiness that we're normally engaged in pursuing. Because it's not actually happiness. From the Dharma point of view, it's not real happiness, it's just less suffering. Like if you're cold and you stand in front of a fire and you kind of warm up, the suffering of being cold kind of goes away. But it doesn't go away forever. It's just now you're feeling warm, so there's just less suffering of cold. It's not that you're completely free from suffering of cold. It's only a matter of time before you're cold again. So same with so many things. Hunger, thirst, heat, whatever. So what we call happiness isn't really happiness. It's just less suffering. Because as long as we're in cyclic existence anyway, we're not free of suffering. And we're not free of suffering because we're not free from the cause of suffering, karma. If we want to be free from suffering, we have to get rid of the cause of suffering. And the karma that we're not free from is caused by ignorance. So we act out of ignorance and we leave imprints on our consciousness, and karmic imprints, we create karma when we act out of ignorance, and those imprints, like seeds, ripen into the experience of suffering. So generally, the ignorance of karma that we act out of, most of our actions are motivated by what we call delusions that spring from ignorance, as we talked last time. The main ones of attachment and anger. So there are many different delusions in. We talk about 6 principal delusions and 20 secondary delusions. So when we act motivated by these kind of negative, disturbing negative minds or delusions, we leave imprints on our consciousness. So even though we think we're doing something that will bring happiness or help us achieve our goals, and it might in the short term, but still by acting in this way we leave imprints on our mind, in our consciousness, like we're planting seeds of future suffering. So that's why by continuing in this way, we'll never be free from suffering. So again, suffering is another word that has to be sort of analysed a little bit. So there are 3 levels of suffering. So the first is called suffering of suffering. It's kind of like rubbing it in. That's the suffering that we all recognise as suffering, that even animals recognise as suffering, that we're all striving day in and day out to avoid. Hunger, thirst, heat, cold, pain, unpleasant situations, injury, sickness, all, death. Although it's inevitable, we try to stave it off. So that's obvious suffering, So nobody wants that. But then the second level of suffering is called changeable suffering. What I was talking about just a moment ago is what we call happiness. It's not true happiness. It's not real happiness because it doesn't last. And in order to get it, we're acting out of attachment. We're acting out of a negative mind. So in our pursuit of this temporary happiness, we're actually creating the cause of suffering. So we're really, blindly stumbling along this path, trying to get away from problems, and in doing so just creating more. And then the third level of suffering, which is kind of the basis of the other two, is called pervasive suffering, and that's simply the fact of being in psychic existence, having a mind that is not free from delusion and karma. So that even if we're not experiencing suffering or changeable suffering, if we're kind of in neutral, it's just a matter of time before we experience suffering again. So we're not free from suffering. The very basis of our being is the foundation for future suffering. So that's one of the things the Buddha saw when he became enlightened, that everybody wants happiness, nobody wants suffering, but nobody knows what the actual cause of happiness and suffering are. So if you don't know what the cause of happiness is, you don't know how to create happiness, and if you don't know what the cause of suffering is, you don't know how to avoid future suffering. And worse is that in the pursuit of happiness, we're actually creating suffering. I don't know, laugh or cry, I'm sure. So at first, he thought, this experience that he had of enlightenment is so different, so profound, so unlike everybody else's experience. It would be difficult to convey, difficult to explain. So at first he didn't teach, but then later he met some people he'd known before, and they saw that he was different. They asked what had happened, so then he started explaining, and so then he began teaching. So he taught for like 40 years, all different kinds of teachings, teaching different people at different times what they needed to hear at the level they were at. So I mentioned, ignorance, gross ignorance. There are two kinds of ignorance. There is ignorance of karma that operates on the level of conventional reality, the world in which we live, Then there's ignorance of ultimate reality, the ignorance of the nature of the self, the nature of our own mind. So it's because of that ignorance, the ignorance of the self, that wrong view of the self, we call it the ego. Or, we don't understand the way in which the mind exists. We don't understand who we are, what we are. So even though all the time we say I, me, we don't know who I is. We don't know who me is, actually. We have this strong feeling of self, that there's a real me in here somewhere. I mean, I'm pointing at my chest. I think most of us, some people may feel I'm in your head or in the chest. I don't think people feel they're in their toe. Oh, this is me. This is me, or I think mostly here. I don't know. Maybe some other cultures believe in some other parts. Do they? Anyway. But there is this idea or this feeling that we're born with, and that all other beings have, that there's a real permanent, unchanging, essential me. So like we say, last year I did this, last week I did this, next week I'm going here, next year I'm going there, as if there's, this some unchanging essence within us that is kind of going through the whole trip, So if we look for that, say, okay, there's a self, there's a me, there's an I. So where is it? Well, it can only be in one of two places. It can only be in our mind or our body. Because that's what a sentient being is, most sentient beings. A combination of body and mind. So the body, we know, is this physical thing that's born, ages and dies. Within the body is our mind, our consciousness, a stream of consciousness that, has no beginning and has no end. So if the I exists, it has to be either in the body or in the mind. So if we look at the body, see the body is made of, it's physical matter, it's made of atoms and molecules, and the atoms are made of, do they have nuclei still? And electrons, and there's protons and neutrons and quarks and I don't know what. It's a long time since I studied physics, and I was never much good at it. But anyway, we know it's basically energy. And it's in a constant state of flux. I mean, the electrons are going around, nothing static still. So if the whole thing, the body, the whole material reality that's built on this is totally impermanent, it's changing every moment. I mean, what do they say? Even the skins, all the skins change like every 8 days or every 8 months or some period of time, Everything's constantly changing. So, and if you dissect the body, physically down to the marrow and microscopically and down to the atoms, there's nothing that you could say, oh, there's the self, there's the me. There's nothing permanent. It's just all a collection of parts. It's like Frank Zappa said, everything is just one big note. It's just a vibration. Well, I don't know if it's true, but anyway, he said some good things. He's also supposed to have said that scientists say that the most common element in the universe is hydrogen, but they're wrong. The most common element in the universe is ignorance. But anyway, we're not studying Zappa this morning. So the self, the I, it can't be in the body because there's no permanent, unchanging part of the body. So if it's not in the body, if it exists, it must be in the mind. So what's the mind? So I said the mind is this stream of consciousness. If you look into your mind, and you get an idea when we're trying to meditate, like at the beginning. I mean, it doesn't stay still for a moment. It's just like running here and there, And even if you were to develop single-pointed concentration, which is a state of mind very different from what we're experiencing at the moment, where you can just focus your mind on your breath or on a visualization or anything, and leave it there, and it just stays there for as long as you want, without wavering. Even then, the mind is still changing, even though it's still. And if you look at it, it really is just a series of thought moments. And if you really look at it, there's nothing in there that isn't either the thought moment that just finished or the one that hasn't come yet. So there's no solid little chunk of mind that's there for a moment. You can say, oh, there it is. So the mind, like the body, is just totally impermanent. So when Buddhism talks about impermanence, also we're not talking about impermanence in the sense of, here today, gone tomorrow, or, the car's impermanent because eventually it's going to break down and disintegrate and be junked and you get a new one. That's gross impermanence. The impermanence we're really talking about is this moment-to-moment, never ceasing change that characterizes life in cyclic existence characterize our body, characterize our mind. So there's nothing in the mind either that you can point to and say, there's the unchanging self, there's the me. So the inescapable conclusion is that the self doesn't exist, it's a delusion. And that's the basic ignorance. That is the ignorance, the belief that something exists that doesn't exist. And then we build the whole house of cards on that wrong belief. So, it's like rotten from the core. Not quite from the core. At the core is the clear light, but around there we've built all these layers of ignorance, and we've been ignorant since beginningless time. So the fundamental root, basic ignorance, is the wrong conception of the self. So as it's the wrong conception, there's an antidote, which is the right conception. So if we can understand the way in which the self exists, everything else kind of goes away. The attachment, the aversion, the pride, the jealousy, all the other delusions. So that's also called realizing, ultimate reality, or realizing the way in which things actually exist. Or sometimes called emptiness, realizing emptiness. Emptiness means things are empty of existing from their own side, including the self. Empty of inherent existence. It's just another way of saying it doesn't exist. Although that's the way we see things. We see things as having some intrinsic selfhood. But all things are selfless, including the self. Now that doesn't mean there's no self. Sometimes we see there's no self, There is a self. There is a person who practices Dharma, who attains liberation, who becomes enlightened. But that self doesn't exist the way we ignorantly conceive the self to exist. So the self, when you see no self, the no self is the no self-existent self. It's not self-existent because it's dependent. It depends on causes and conditions, like everything else, pretty much. So the Buddha saw that as he'd understood, interdependence and emptiness and so on, that others could understand it too. So then he began teaching, and that was, really in a way, there were two kind of essential messages, I guess you'd say, of the Buddha. One was this teaching on the reality, the way in which things exist, and the other was the teaching on compassion. I know how things exist. You poor suckers don't. It's not like that. It's like to feel compassion for those who don't understand, and that's where he was coming from, and to help others understand the way in which things exist, so that they can be happy and free from suffering. So compassion, as we talked about last time, and as I mentioned in the motivation before, compassion is developed into great compassion. So compassion that we normally feel, compassion is wanting others to be free from suffering. So great compassion is wanting all beings equally, all sentient beings, to be free from suffering, not feeling I want my friends to be free from suffering more than I want people I don't know or people I dislike, let them suffer. not like that. Great compassion wants all to be free, and from that comes what we call bodhicitta, the determination to reach enlightenment in order to free all sentient beings from suffering. So that's the motivation we try to generate at the beginning, that in order to free beings from suffering we have to be enlightened, and so we determine to reach enlightenment not for our own benefit, which undoubtedly it is, but in order to help others, to be equipped to free others from suffering in the greatest possible way. So anyway, for people who haven't been here before, I think that's what we're kind of about here. So at the end of the last session, a couple of weeks ago, I said we'd start. Well, that was wrong. Didn't start. But we'd, if anyone had any questions, so we can do that now. Chantal?
Last session or from today?
Anything, anytime.
What is the subtle energy mind in Buddhist tradition, the way you offered it, that was so enlightening today? By the nature of being a beginner, first step. The nuance in the subtle mind between enlightenment and self-realization.
Not all Buddhist schools would divide the mind like this, but in Tibetan Buddhism, which is the Vajrayana tradition, we say the mind, there's the gross mind, and there's the subtle mind, and there's the most subtle mind. So the gross mind is the sense consciousness with which we operate, you know, and the subtle mind is more on the realm of thought, but the most subtle mind is the mind that continues from life to life. The most subtle mind is the mind that contains or carries all the karmic imprints from the beginningless lives that haven't ripened yet. The most subtle mind is the mind that goes on to enlightenment. The most subtle mind is the clear light nature of mind.
So without analysis truly of being ignorant of the Buddhist past, would you say from this conversation this morning that what intrigues me personally of the nature of the Buddhi mind or the Buddha mind, that from this cyclic existence, the Buddha, from the imprint motivation beyond the conventional world of being a prince and being born in the inheritance of his father and so on and so forth, to already have the imprint of the motivation, knowing or not knowing, since he himself went through a very, very, very serious suffering of the pilgrimage of his life on the physicality, but on the subtle mind, it seems to me that the motivation was so clear, it was so clear that nothing was obstructing his endurance and nothing was obstructing his absolute motivation to come to a place first for himself. I cannot speak for him, I've not been living with him, yet the teaching I hear as alive today as they were then, I suspect, otherwise you would not be sitting there transmitting this knowledge.
Right.
How to move this energy of motivation?
Well, again, not all Buddhist traditions explain the Buddha's life. in the same way. Again, from Mahayana tradition, or Tibet tradition, we say that he was actually enlightened before. Like Maitreya Buddha, who we've exiled to the other room now. The next Buddha, Maitreya, is already enlightened in the way he comes. And when the Buddhas come, they actually go through these 12 deeds, so-called, as a sort of charade, as a teaching itself. Being born into a wealthy family, renouncing the kingdom, going off, pretending not to be enlightened, going off in search, studying with other teachers, following a certain path, meditating in Bodh Gaya, having a breakthrough, turning the wheel of Dharma, teaching the Four Noble Truths, doing various things, and then passing away in Kushinagar, passing away. So there are 12, I can't remember them all now, there are 12 deeds that all Buddhas go through. So the life of the Buddha himself was actually a teaching. He was already enlightened, He was doing it to benefit others. So the motivation to come here was already there. So, I mean, there's a story about that I remember Lama Yeshe telling, that in some Buddha realm somewhere, in infinite space, there was there was the Buddha of that realm, and there were all these bodhisattvas who were almost enlightened, and there was like like on TV they have these police shows. So all the cops gather in the morning, and then the sergeant, whoever, says, okay, now who's going to, this is, you're going to do this investigation, and you're going over there, and there's a murder, I want you guys to investigate that. So there was the Buddha there, and there was all these bodhisattvas, and he was like giving them all work, And he said, there's this joint over there in this sort of solar system called Earth, So I need a volunteer to go down there, because these people are like totally crazy, Like this is really deeply ignorant, that place. So like no one was like, oh, I don't want to go there. They were all sort of like, oh, let me do the murder investigation. So finally the Shakyamuni Buddha, he said, okay, I'll go. So all the other bodhisattvas were like, oh my God, he must have such unbelievable compassion. He wants to go there. These kind of crazy people on earth, So that was the story. So he really had powerful compassion and bodhicitta motivation to help, So as a result of that powerful motivation, 2,500 years later, we still have the teachings, and I wouldn't say that I'm here passing on the transmission or anything. I'm just here, because Geshe-la's away, basically. It was funny, I remember that story. We were having a meeting in we were in England in 1978, and there were about 12 or 15 FPMT centres. This centre was, not even a glint in anybody's eye, at that point. I think at that time there was only one centre in America. 1978. It was Vajrapani Institute. It had just started a year or two before in California, in Boulder Creek. And we had a meeting. There were like several centre directors. I was running a centre in Delhi at the time. And we had this meeting. It was our first sort of meeting with Lama Yeshe about the organisation, that had just sprung up over the last 3 or 4 years, really. And the topic came up of Vajrapani, and nobody wanted to be the director there, because there's all these dope growing hippies there, and they didn't like rules, and they didn't really like the sangha, the people in robes. They didn't like discipline, and it was kind of hard, and a couple of people had tried or something, So they were discussing the problems there, and at that point, well, I say I was running a centre. I'd been sent to Delhi the year before to start a centre, but I hadn't started a centre because I hadn't found a suitable place, and we didn't have any money, and nobody really wanted a centre there except Lama Yeshe, you know. So it was, well, it wasn't kind of like here where there was like most of the centres started because there were a group of students and they wanted to get something together where they could come and study and practice together and like that. So they were talking about the difficulties at Vajrapani, and I remember this story of the Buddha. So I said to Lama Yeshe, okay, I'll go, you know. And he looked at me, he said, you? He said, you can't even get a centre together in Delhi. What makes you think you can do anything in California? You know? So I said, okay. So then I slunk off to Delhi and finally got the centre together there the next year. Anyway, so the point is that the Buddha was, again, you know, some Buddhist traditions take the story literally, that he was a prince and he developed renunciation and he did this hard practice and meditation and broke through and like that, as it appears on the surface. The deeper story is that he was actually already enlightened and he came here and he went through this. I mean, if he came like out of the sky as a sort of the Buddha, people couldn't relate. I mean, say, well, you know, I can't come out of the sky like that, you know, how can I? But, you know, you can say, well, oh, okay, he was wealthy, he realized wealth doesn't do it for you, you know, he abandoned the wealth. The wealth isn't really the cause of happiness. Then and part of his journey was to become ascetic, and you'll see these statues of the fasting Buddha. I think the famous one was in I don't know if it was in what's Pakistan now. It's in Peshawar or anyway. There was some place in Pakistan where you see there's almost like a skeleton, because when he was practicing with these other ascetics, the Hindus or whatever they were called then, what were they called then? No, I don't know if they were called Vedic practice. They practiced the Vedas, or they weren't. Hinduism wasn't exactly called that then. Anyway, so but they had some ascetic practices where they starved themselves. They lived on a rice grain a day, or they did these kind of weird practices, sitting in front of fires and things like that. You know, really sort of self-mortification. So he realized that extreme asceticism isn't the way to go either. So that's why, you know, he followed the middle path, not overindulgence, not over self-punishment, you know, just keep yourself healthy, but follow the path, you know, without wavering. So, you know, the middle way also has another philosophical interpretation of the middle way between the extremes of eternalism and nihilism. That's something else. So, so moderation in all things, you know. So, I don't forget why I said that, but anyway. Any other questions?
He spent some time developing, the concept of self and the mistaken self that doesn't exist inherently. What is it exactly that moves from life to life?
The extremely subtle mind. The extremely subtle mind. The clear light. The clear light mind. So what happens when we die is that as our body and our senses begin to fail, the mind slowly withdraws to the heart area, the heart chakra. So the gross mind subsides or ceases to function. So, you know, sight, smells, taste, touch. Sight, smell, taste, touch, sound, yeah. So all these gradually fail. So that allows more subtle mind to become apparent. So then, as the 80 gross delusions, the 80 thoughts. If you read the book Death, Intermediate State and Rebirth, very skinny little book, but it has very profound. You familiar with that? We've looked at it when we've done the Discovering Buddhism module on death and rebirth, and we've looked at it there. But all these 80 delusions are listed there. You know, all these things that go away. So as the gross things disintegrate or lose power, more subtle ones that weren't apparent before become apparent. And as they go, so then finally, the moment of death is when the mind leaves the body. So that's the most subtle level. The clear light mind leaves the body and goes into the intermediate state, and it stays in the intermediate state for a few days or a few weeks until it finds another body. It's drawn to another body through the force of karma. Through throwing karma, which is actually arises at the moment of death. So then you go into the intermediate state body of the physical body that you're going to occupy next. So, you know, if you're going to be a dog, you go into the intermediate state of the dog, so like that. So then when a suitable dog's body becomes available, the body of a dog, your consciousness goes into that products of conception, sperm and the egg and the mind come together, and then that becomes a viable fetus, and you get reborn as a dog or whatever it is. So that's in the case of beings who are born from parents. You know, there are other kinds of rebirth as well, but so that's what goes from life to life, the most subtle consciousness. And when we practice Vajrayana or Tantra, you know, the school of Buddhism that's the main practice in Tibetan Buddhism, Vajrayana, you know, sometimes the quick path to enlightenment. The key there really is to meditate on the consciousness and the winds and the channels, the mind, and the mind or the consciousness doesn't flop about by itself. It's carried by energy called the wind, or the prana, or lung in Tibetan. And this also doesn't go here and there. It's carried within psychic channels within the body. So just as the blood goes through the blood vessels, or the nerves go through the nervous system, the mind travels through the psychic nervous system. There are said to be 72,000 channels throughout the whole body. So there's a central channel that runs from the crown of a head, or sometimes runs from brow chakra, and down in front of the spinal column, down to the sex chakra in the lower area. And then along the central channel there are concentrations of energy, or wheels, called chakras. And from there, there's one at the brow, the crown, the throat, the heart, the navel, the sex area. And from there are 8 or 16 or 32 in different chakras, channels that branch out from those different areas. Anyway, not supposed to talk too much about that unless we've had highest Yoga Tantra initiation. But I'm not supposed to talk about it because I don't know anything about it. So, but anyway, basically it's like that. So in this tantric meditation, we try to bring the wind, and with it, obviously, the mind, because the mind is inseparable from the wind, into the central channel and get control over it. So that at the moment of death, when the clear light mind, which is the most subtle level of mind, arises, is the very moment of death. Because we've practiced these meditations on death and the death process, because we're very familiar with it, like His Holiness the Dalai Lama has said, he dies 8 times a day. Word similar to that means he practices this meditation, because every tantric sadhana or method of accomplishment in highest Yoga Tantra has a part where you can meditate on the death process. So anyway, it gets too complicated if we go into it much. But what we're trying to do is become very familiar with the process of death as it happens, so that when the clear light of mind arises, we're waiting for it. We know it's going to arise, and then we can hold that mind, and because it's the most subtle, it's the most unobstructed level of mind, we can then use that mind to meditate on emptiness, to realize reality. So I don't know if it sounds easy, but it's not. But that's kind of the goal, So then, and you'll see that when these great lamas die, their body, they die in meditation, they're sitting up, and they're doing this practice. And so when they're meditating, they say, he's meditating in the clear light. So they've arrested the process at that point, when the clear light might, instead of the mind leaving the body, it stays in the body. But it's extremely level. The body's clinically dead. There's no brain activity, there's no heart or anything, there's no breathing. But the body will stay alive. Can be for weeks at a time. That's why the Indian people were surprised when in the hot tropical thing, some of these Tibetan lamas died in the hot weather, and the bodies didn't decompose, didn't start to smell. So until the lama's finished the meditation, then he takes his mind out of his body, goes into the next life. And often they're waiting for the suitable rebirth. So you see these lamas, these reincarnate lamas, these Rinpoches. So these are, usually that's a term. Incarnate lama is someone who achieved the ability in his previous life to direct his consciousness into a body where he'd be able to continue the work and perhaps re-establish the karmic connections with his previous life students to continue guiding them and doing the work to bring sentient beings to enlightenment. So that's what goes to the next life.
Some of us were in a class with John Cho recently, and he mentioned calm abiding, and some of us had a question about what level of meditation the calm abiding is. Is that a level that's necessary in order to do this practice which you're mentioning?
Yeah, I'd say. In order to, as I mentioned before, to escape from cyclic existence, to be free from gross delusion and to be free from karma, Buddhism talks about the 3 higher trainings: the higher training in conduct or behavior, morality, the higher training in concentration, and the higher training in wisdom. So, the bottom line of practice is to avoid the subject that I'm supposed to be talking about, is to avoid the 8 worldly dharmas. So, or the 10 non-virtues. I mean, there's more than 8 worldly dharmas, really, but I mean, this is a way of encapsulating them to get an idea. It's like we talk about the 10 non-virtuous actions. There's a lot more than 10, believe me. But if we understand those, we kind of get the idea, you know. So, and if it says, okay, well, you've got to avoid like the 15,000 non-virtuous actions, you're like, oh my God, you know, 15,000, you know. It's hard enough to remember 10. So, should we do the quiz? No. So, but we need to know these very fundamental things like the 8 worldly dharmas, so we can kind of try and understand what it is we're doing in our life that's wrong and what we're doing that's right, you know. So I'm trying to make it a little bit easier. So practice, the fundamental, as a baby Buddhists, we try to avoid the 10 non-virtuous actions: not killing, not stealing, not engaging in sexual misconduct, not telling lies, not speaking harshly, not slandering, not gossiping, not having ill will, not having covetousness, not having wrong views. I mean, these are the 10 non-virtuous actions, you know. We try to avoid them, the 8 worldly dharmas we talked about last time. So, that's well and good to avoid those negative actions. But what we, and as scared as we need to be of those, what we need to be more scared of is the ones we already did before, in previous lives. Because this life is just one. There's only so much bad we can do, you know. If you have beginningless previous lives, can you imagine, you know, this life multiplied infinitely? And this life is not bad as lives go, you know. So there's a lot of stored up negativity from beginningless time that we've created that's formless. If it were manifest in form, it would more than fill infinite space. But it's carried on our most subtle mind that goes from life to life. That's how karma, we're not free from karma because our most subtle mind carries all that baggage with it. So because those imprints are there, we have the tendency to do the negative actions again, you know. I mean, you know, the genius that Mozart was because in his previous life he must have been a really great musician, you know. So that imprint was so close to surface and so close to his next life, so he was born human again, that it was just, when he was 3 or 4, it was just like he was this like 80-year-old musician in a young body, kind of, you know. I mean, that's how we explain these things. Child prodigies or geniuses or, you know, even someone as unlikely as me getting into Buddhism. I mean, it's like there's previous imprints. So some of them are good and some of them are bad. Most of them are bad. So in order to stop them, to dampen or to neutralize their energy that wants us to push us into killing or stealing or doing all these negative things again, we take vows. That's why the Buddha gave precepts. I vow not to kill. I vow not to steal. Because that, rather than just abstaining from the action, which is kind of wishy-washy, it's good, but you know, it doesn't do much about the previous ones. So by taking a vow, we sort of send a positive wave of energy back into our consciousness that dampens down or neutralizes this tendency to do these negative actions again. That's why when we do purification, one of the 4 opponent powers is this determination or making a vow not to do it again. So it has different purposes, the vow. One is makes us more mindful of when we're about to do that action again in this life and can hold us back. So, oh no, I can't do that, I vowed not to, you know. But there's also this more subtle effect that the vow has to stop the karmic tendencies to repeat, you know. So why I'm going on about that, if we don't have a foundation of morality, of discipline, it's impossible to develop karma binding or to develop the next higher training. It's like a 3-story building. You can't build the second story without the first. It's not going to float in the air, you know. So on the first floor, or the foundation, whatever you want to call it, of morality, we build the next floor of concentration. If we don't have moral conduct, even we sit down and meditate, there's just this agitation in our mind. It's like like I've said before. It's like our mind is like a turbulent lake in a hurricane. Say hurricane or hurricane? Hurricane? Anyway, I'm speaking English. So, no offense. So in a windstorm, there's this wind blowing on the lake, and it's all churned up, and all the mud has come up from the bottom, and there's froth and bubbles and bits of wood and stuff, and if you look into it, you can't see a thing below the surface. So that's basically our mind. We see when we try to meditate on the breath, we can't get below the surface. It's just all this surface activity going on. I can't sit. What's the position? Where's my breath? I don't know what does it mean. The nostrils. I mean, even before we get into it, So, and as long as the wind keeps blowing, the water's not going to settle. But if the wind stops, then gradually, the froth and bubble goes away, and then the mud settles to the bottom, and after a while, the water becomes very clear, and you can see way down to the bottom. So it's kind of like that with our mind. So engaging in negative actions, not keeping precepts, or taking precepts, not keeping them, whatever, it just agitates our mind like the wind blowing. So if we stop agitating our mind, then we can start to develop some kind of concentration, some level of calm abiding. Now I don't know how he just mentioned it or he spoke about it in detail, but there are nine stages. So they're clearly delineated in the book, so you can see. And there's a chart. Did you show the Shinny chart? Have you seen that chart with the monk and the elephant and the monkey? And so it's this development of calm abiding is also depicted pictorially, so we can see as distraction diminishes and as sluggishness diminishes. The tendency to be dark and heavy and go to sleep. Our meditation improves. So, what was the question?
He basically said that after 50 or a little bit later, it's really hard to get to calm abiding, and you have to do it younger. So that's basically what he was talking about. Something like that. That's what I heard. So that was kind of like, too hard.
Too late for some of you, then I will grasp the metal. Anyway, I think it's never too late to learn, and the thing is, the more tendencies we put into our mind in this life, we're not going to get it done in this life. We've got to think in future lives. So the more, even if we can't accomplish it in this life, if we try, maybe in our next life we'll be one of those young people who can accomplish it. You know what I mean? I mean, the more you do it, the better, the easier it gets, whether it's good or whether it's bad. That's the nature of the mind. So anyway, so if we don't have calm abiding or single point concentration, there's a slight difference between the two. I forget what it is. But we need perfect concentration to realize the higher training in wisdom. So there's the higher training in morality, higher training in concentration, and the higher training in wisdom. So they go one on top of the other. To realize emptiness, we have to have perfect concentration. And the way we do it is, we study the teachings on emptiness, and we meditate on them to get a clear intellectual understanding of what it means. So we analyze, and we come to this intellectual understanding that things do not have inherent existence. They're empty of inherent existence. Inherent existence doesn't exist, and there's a kind of a space. So then when we reach that point analytically, then we bring to bear our perfect concentration on that understanding, and gradually, through repeating that process again and again, we can hold our mind on the intellectual understanding of emptiness for longer and longer periods until we can break through and and then our conceptual understanding of an emptiness becomes a non-conceptual or a direct perception, which may be only very fleeting, but again, because we have this really good concentration, it arises, and because we're unfamiliar with it, it doesn't, even though we can concentrate, it doesn't last. But then we do it again and again, so gradually, longer and longer, our object of meditation doesn't become the breath. It's not a visualization, it's emptiness. Now, there are techniques in Tantra for meditating on that which may be more powerful than the one I've just described, which is more like a sutra technique. You study the teachings, you analyze, do analytical meditation, and then you do placement or stabilizing or concentrated meditation on that intellectual understanding until it becomes a realization. But anyway, that's generally the process. So it's the same with the clear light, If we want to focus and meditate on the clear light, we have to have perfect concentration, which is, I think, that was your question, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes,
Yeah.
I didn't understand the progression.
Yeah, so look, it's all about progression. The whole stages of the path is about progression. One thing leads to another. There was even a song about it. One of these days you're going to discover one little thing leads to another. Chipping away, chipping at the temple of love. You remember that? I was there in the 50s. So you're really getting an education. So it's true, one little thing leads to another, positively and negatively. Anyway, as Jackie Mason said, all good things must come to an end. But since this is not such a good thing, I'll take one more question.
I couldn't help but thinking when I was reading the part when Lama Zopa was describing how, as a monk, when he finally came to the 8 worldly dharmas through reading the opening of the door of Dharma, how he became a better student. He got more connected to his teachings, whereas he felt a little flighty before that. And when I was reading that, I was thinking, well, weren't you just the Laredo Lama? I mean, didn't you already know this? And so he comes back to a realization. And I'm thinking, does ignorance grow back? Basically.
Well, it can until you reach a certain level. I think if you're at the level of being able to control your rebirth, you're at the level where it doesn't come back. You have such powerful compassion, such powerful bodhicitta. There are 5 paths that philosophically to enlightenment. There's the path of preparation, there's the path of accumulation or the path of merit, the path of preparation, the path of no more seeing, the path of meditation, the path of no more learning. So I think it's on the second one, the path of preparation, that has like 9 levels. I think it's like in the middle level, something like that. You reach a point of no return, that you won't be reborn in the lower realms. And so as we progress, there's a certain point where you don't fall back much, if at all, and then a certain point where you don't fall back at all. So, as I told the story of the Buddha, like, he was enlightened, but he pretended not to be enlightened, and he went through all these things as a teaching, I've got to think this is, I don't believe Lama Zopa Rinpoche hadn't practiced Dharma until he was 25 years old or whatever he was, reading that text in Laudo Lama's cave, which he tells the story there. Part of it's humility, because he never put himself up ever, and part of it is to make an impression on us, as it does, So, and His Holiness the Dalai Lama, you often hear him in his teachings where he's talking about emptiness. He says, "Look, I don't understand this, or I don't have any realization of this, but I've studied." Explain. So one time, one of the students challenged him, like they said, "If you don't, look, Your Holiness, you always say you don't understand this, and you don't. If you don't, what hope have we got?" This is a story Lama Zopa Rinpoche tells. I guess he was there, His Holiness kind of relented for a moment and said, "Well, actually, I was with the Buddha in one of my previous lives. He was with Shakyamuni Buddha." So he said something like that, So that so there's a reason that the lamas say that, and a lot of it is they try never to say, "I've got this realization." The Buddha fearlessly proclaimed that he was enlightened. That was then. This is a different time. So even someone who's enlightened wouldn't be going around, and as they say, if someone says they're enlightened, they're probably not. And if someone says they're not enlightened, they could be, So, or they're probably not, but they could be, So, I think it was a teaching like that,
It has to do with figurative and literal and the teachings in a sense.
Yeah, definitive or interpretive, exactly, yeah. So anyway, we have a puja at 1 o'clock, so I think we have to wrap up on time at least. So we'll continue this non-teaching next week, and then Geshe will be back. So so thank you. That's it. Do you want to? So Bob will take us out. Pardon?
Should we read one the book next for the next class since we didn't?
I'll send it out on the email.
Just curious
I'll give
what
it.
we should read.
Yeah, I'll get them sent it out this week.
Please turn to page 39 of the prayer book. Of a Thanksgiving mandala offering. Saji perki jukshin me tok tram ri rab ling jin yi de gen padi san ke jing du mig te uwa gi drokon nam dag jing la chur pa shuk jetsun lame kutse rab ten ching nam katrin le chok chu ge padang lo sang ten pe drun me sasungi drowe mun sel tak tu neg yu chig idam guru ratna mandalakam niryatayami. Jitsung Kapa's final Amrit prayer. From my 2 collections of vast space that I have amassed from working with effort at this practice for a great length of time, may I become the chief leading Buddha for all those whose mind's wisdom Maya is blinded by ignorance. Even if I do not reach this state, may I be held in your love and compassion for all my lives, Manjushri. May I find the best of complete graded paths of the teachings, and may I please all the Buddhas by practicing. Using skillful means drawn by the strong force of compassion, may I clear the darkness from the minds of all beings with the points of the path as I have discerned them. May I uphold the Buddha's teachings for a very long time. With my heart going out with great compassion in whatever direction the most precious teachings have not yet spread, or once spread have declined, may I reveal this treasure of happiness and aid. May the minds of those who wish for liberation be granted bounteous peace, and the Buddha's deeds be nourished for a long time. By even this graded course to enlightenment completed due to the wondrous virtuous conduct of the Buddhas and their children. May all human and non-human beings who eliminate adversity and make things conducive for practicing the excellent paths never be parted in any of their lives from the purest path praised by the Buddhas. Whenever someone makes an effort to act in accordance with the tenfold Mahayana virtuous practices, may they always be assisted by the mighty ones, and may oceans of prosperity spread everywhere. The short, long life prayer for His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama. In that snow mountain encircled land, source of every benefit and joy, may Lord Tenzin Gyatso Chen Rezig remain in life till samsara's end. Page 49, the short, long life prayer for Lama Zopa Rinpoche. Tuk tsu chang jing jam gun gyelwei Tenzin kyong pelwei kunzo do podze chok sum kurwei legman tu drug Pahadak sok dul jegun du jab ten shuk. Page 57, prayer of dedication. Through this virtue may I swiftly, having gained Guru Buddha's state, place each and every sentient being without exception in that state. Precious supreme Bodhi mind, may it where unborn arise, and where born never decline, but increase forevermore. Page 75, make the same off. Migmet se wei ter chen chen rezi dreame kien pe paham ko jam pelyang gaham chen ke pe tsu gen song kaba Lo sangrak pe jabla soade.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nick.
So we have the Guru Puja at 1 o'clock. So I guess we want to set up the room. Any other announcements? Anyway, if you're on the mailing list, check your junk mail for Kurukulla mail. And see you later. Thank you.
Thank you, Nick.